Hi, welcome to the Post Sunday app. I'm Daniel Bennett. I'm not normally hosting. I'm normally where my friend Doug Van Meter is. And so Doug, thanks for joining us on the Post Sunday app today.
Yeah. Pleasure.
Yeah, well, Ben, or a guest host lately, has been doing these, and so I'm not very great at the question asking yet, but really appreciated your ministry of the word to us yesterday. It was just a joy to have you in the pulpit, and many people came up to me and talked about how encouraged they were by Psalm 130, and this had been a passage that you were excited to preach about. What was some of your excitement during the week about thinking about this text in our church?
Yeah, I've really come to appreciate Psalm 130 over the last several weeks. I preached through the Psalms recently in our church. I'm going through them. And as I was meditating upon Psalm 130, it really struck me just how relevant it is because it's so gospel-focused. And Martin Luther called it a Pauline psalm just because it was so heavy on gospel issues. And so I've really been taking great comfort in my own soul because it deals with the fact that we're sinners who need a Savior. And that's where I live.
Yeah.
So personally, it's just been feeding my own soul.
Yeah. It's good. Even as you began reading it, I just loved how you even read it. You were reading it from the New King James, and then you also said, okay, and here's how the ESV translates it here, and just the reading of the word was even just at that point. And I was encouraged. But a couple things you said really resonated with me. You mentioned this psalm is where we're at. And underneath your first point, as you're talking about the psalm, you mentioned the idea of never stop crying out. Maybe elaborate on that a little bit more. Why do you think people sometimes stop crying out or are afraid to cry out? What do you think is happening spiritually in that situation?
Yeah, I think there could be a few reasons. I think one of those, most negative, is pride. That we would rather wallow in self-pity rather than seeking the Lord who can actually do something about our problem. And, Jesus talked about only those who are sick see their need for a physician. So I think sometimes pride can keep us from seeing how desperate we are and therefore not crying out. But I think other times it's a faith issue. We don't understand the gospel, so we feel like we failed, particularly if you've been saved a long time. You feel like you failed over and over again, and surely God's tired of hearing from me.
Yeah.
And we don't appreciate the fact that He is a God of steadfast love.
Yeah.
So we don't cry out really because of unbelief.
Yeah. So even you said, even those of us who've been saved a long time cannot understand the gospel.
Yeah.
So you think, well, I understand the gospel because I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
How does a person who's a Christian, how is it possible they can't understand the gospel?
I think because too many of us think that the gospel, as Tim Keller says, are just the ABCs of the Christian life.
Yeah.
And that somehow we go deeper than the gospel.
Yeah.
And I met Graham Goldsworthy some years ago in Australia, many years ago, and I was a very young guy in the ministry. And he really helped me to understand Romans 1, the opening verses, about the gospel concerning God's Son. And he said to me, you never outgrow the gospel. And he really helped me to understand that. But I think a lot of us feel like, the gospel is just basic and we move on.
Yeah.
And so we don't contemplate it. And I've seen in the last 20 years a resurgence in the church of an emphasis on what is the gospel. In great books like Greg Gilbert's book on what is the gospel, those are very helpful to remind us what it's all about. Keller says it's the A to the Z of the Christian life.
Yeah. Yeah, you corrected yourself
Sorry,
yesterday.
A to Z.
A to Z, A to Z.
Yeah.
So, now what about, there's another statement you made that I thought would be good to unpack a little bit. You said that despair is a choice. We don't have to have despair. What would you say to the person who says, boy, I feel like I'm in despair right now, I don't feel like I chose this? How would you help them understand the gospel and all?
Yeah, no, let me clarify that. Somebody said distress is unavoidable in life. You just can't avoid problems. A lot of them are not of your own making. But how you respond to those is a choice. So a person may feel like they're in despair. And I'm not speaking of that, but it is a choice whether or not you're going to grovel in that despair, or whether you're going to embrace the gospel and begin to climb out of the pit, like in Psalm 130, because he begins in despair. Out of the depths I have cried, and Jonah uses that word in Jonah 2:5. He says the waters overflowed me. It's like he was drowning. But by the end of the psalm, he's climbed out of that because he's looked to the Lord. So in that sense, whether or not we stay in despair, perhaps I should say, is a choice.
That's good. I appreciate that. Wonderful psalm. Again, a lot of people were coming up to me, not just, that was a nice sermon, but here's what Doug said, and here's how it resonated with me, and I can see why you like him so much. It was really helpful for our people.
I think it's where we live, you know, and it's just so relevant to us. So.
Yeah, good. You're on sabbatical, and I don't know if you've thought about this, but you're really kind of making me look bad because on your sabbatical, you've been way more productive than I was on my sabbatical. In fact, you've been more productive on your sabbatical than I am just during my week.
I don't think that's true.
So what were some of your goals for the sabbatical as you left?
Yeah, well, as you know, this is I've never had a sabbatical. Been in the ministry for almost 30 years, I guess. One church for 23 years. And so when you actually raised the issue last year about me having a sabbatical, I went to my elders and they thought it was a great idea.
Yeah.
So I'm new at this, so I'm probably not doing it right. But for me, the sabbatical I'm getting my rest by stepping aside from weekly preparing, usually 2 sermons. I preach usually Sunday morning, Sunday night. And just that kind of pressure, I mean, that's huge. You know what that's like.
Yeah.
So I've had a rest from that so I can actually read and study other things. So I've been, as you know, I read that book, Kingdom Through Covenant by Gentry and Wellum, which was really helpful for me. And then the follow-up book last week, the Progressive Covenantalism. Yeah. I was reading a book on From Heaven He Came and Sought Her, about particular redemption, which has been
just some light reading. These are really light books.
But the sabbatical has given me the opportunity to do that, where I can just spend several hours a day reading, and I've really enjoyed that. Yeah. Neat. So that's going to be hard to get back now to the grind in some ways, but it's been good. Yeah, it's been helpful for me just to kind of. I've read some of those books, and just being able to dialogue with you about those issues has been really helpful for my ministry. What are some things the reading? What are the things are you taking back and saying, okay, this is some things God's going to do in my ministry differently, or continue to do? Yeah, I think one thing I can be more clear, I hope, in my preaching about issues of the covenant and how the Bible is all pieced together. Yeah, it's really helped me to see that, so I appreciate that. But just as I mentioned to you last week, watching you preach and listening the last couple of weeks has been helpful to be more slow and explain things before I jump into application, because I'm by nature an exhorter. Yeah. So I can jump into that too quick and kind of give everybody a whiplash, because where's that coming from? So watching your ministry has been a great help. Being at your church has been a great encouragement. Yeah. Seeing the body life here, we're blessed with a good body life in our church, but this is going to, just seeing your interaction with one another. Yeah. I can go back with some lessons to encourage our people in that. Well, we're, Bethany, we're grateful to you for being here this month, and we're thankful to Brackenhurst. Thank you for allowing Doug to take this sabbatical and be with us. As I mentioned yesterday, I've been blessed. My family has been blessed. Last night, Ellie is quite taken with Uncle Doug. She, is Uncle Doug okay? Can I get you something with Uncle? I mean, she's just very attuned to Uncle Doug. So it's been very sweet to watch her with you, and then our church. All our guys who've met with you, the families who've met with you, just really have come away encouraged, and I think you add a neat perspective of someone who's been faithful at a church for 23 years. It helps our church kind of say, okay, this is what the next few years can look like if God is gracious, and I believe He will be. So thank you for. Well, thank you. Your family's been a great blessing to me. I'm not looking forward to leaving on Wednesday. Well, we'll see what the Lord allows there. You might lose some keys or something. But. I said to several last night, I really feel like I'm embracing this church as a part of my family. So when I come to the States, I want to put this on my on my schedule, as we say.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us for this week's edition of the Post Sunday App.